Their house stood at the end of a dusty red road leading out to the vast prairie. It was a two-story wooden home, painted white with a gray shingle roof, and a wide porch in front where an old swing creaked whenever the wind blew. In the distance, a wooden fence enclosed a small garden that changed with the seasons: tulips in spring, golden sunflowers in summer, fiery red maple leaves in autumn, and a blanket of snow in winter. James, the husband, had built a cradle with his own hands out of pine and placed it in the upstairs room. He worked on weekends, the fresh scent of wood filling the entire house. Anna, his wife, sat by the window, knitting a tiny blanket patterned with pale blue threads, glancing at him now and then. "One day our baby will sleep here," James said, running his hand along the smooth wooden rail, his eyes brimming with hope. Anna leaned her head against his shoulder and smiled softly. In her heart, the future seemed as clear as the sunlight outside. Children's laughter ringing through the house, little feet pattering across the porch, and evenings spent together watching the crimson sunset over the prairie. But life is never as simple as dreams. The first month, Anna bought a pregnancy test. One line: disappointment, but she told herself it might just be the wrong timing. James wrapped his arm around her shoulders, speaking gently. "It's okay, love. It will come." The third month, still the same result. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. Each test ended in the same heartbreak. Anna began to fear even the sound of tearing paper when opening the test kit. Each time, her heart clenched, hoping for a miracle. Yet disappointment followed again and again. At night, she turned to the wall and cried quietly. She didn't want James to see, but he always heard the muffled sobs against the pillow. He never said much, only pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if to give her his warmth. "Don't cry, Anna," he whispered. "If we never have children, I still have you. You're all I need." Those words cut deep and comforted her all at once. She knew how much he longed to be a father, yet he never blamed her. They traveled from small towns to big cities, from private clinics to modern hospitals. One doctor after another, one prescription after the next. Once, a doctor in Denver promised them the latest treatment. They borrowed money and drove 2 days, only to come home crushed once more. Anna endured countless pills, hormone injections that left her body flushed one moment and shivering the next, her mood swinging wildly. Sometimes she screamed for no reason, then collapsed in sobs. James never reproached her. He simply endured with her. After one failed surgery, Anna sat pale and trembling in a hospital corridor. "Maybe I don't deserve to be a mother," she whispered. James knelt before her, holding her hands tightly, eyes locked on hers. "Don't you ever say that. You're already my whole world. Children would only be a gift. I don't need that gift to love you." James once had a promising career. He had graduated with honors and was offered a high-paying job at a major company in Chicago. Friends told him all he needed to do was move to the city for a bright future. But James refused. "I can't leave you alone to fight through this. Work can wait. Your health can't." So he stayed in their small town, driving an old pickup truck for hours to hospitals, waiting in antiseptic rooms, holding Anna's hand through every test. People called him foolish. Some mocked. "If she can't have kids, just find another wife. Why suffer like this?" James only gave a thin smile. When a close friend once asked if he regretted it, he replied, "My future is Anna. Not the job, not the money, not ambition. Only her." 12 years passed. The cradle still sat in the upstairs room, gathering dust. Sometimes Anna would pause at the door, peek in at the empty crib, and quietly close it again. Each time, her chest tightened as though squeezed by invisible hands. James saw it all. At night, he held her and whispered, "I could live my whole life without children, but I could never live without you." Anna nodded, but her tears betrayed her. One winter night, the wind howled across the prairie, snow tapping against the roof. Anna rose from bed, knelt by the window, and clasped her hands in prayer. James woke to see her trembling in the pale moonlight. He went to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "What are you praying for?" Anna turned, her eyes swollen red. "I'm only asking for one child. Just one, that's all." James pulled her into his arms. They sat in silence, the only sounds the wailing wind and her stifled sobs. The cradle remained empty, but hope never died. Every morning on the prairie began with familiar sounds. The wind sweeping through fields of grass, larks calling one another across the wide blue sky, and sometimes the faint jingling of cowbells from a distant neighbor's herd. At the little house at the end of the red dirt road, Sarah and Daniel started their day like any other couple, brewing coffee, sweeping the porch, feeding the chickens, and preparing for the long day ahead. Yet deep within, each morning carried with it a quiet yearning. Perhaps today a miracle might come. Years earlier, Daniel had left behind a good job in the city, choosing instead to do odd manual jobs around town, just so he could stay close to Sarah. He never wanted her to face the long road of treatments alone. Each time they drove more than 2 hours to the hospital in Denver, Daniel sat with her hand in his, never letting go. His hands were calloused and warm, an unspoken promise that he would never leave her side. Sarah would never forget the day they returned from a failed appointment. The doctor had shaken his head, saying their chances were nearly zero. On the way home, snow blanketed the prairie, and the pickup truck rattled under the force of the wind. Sarah turned her face toward the window, hiding the tears spilling down her cheeks. But Daniel laid his hand gently on her shoulder and whispered, "No matter what, you are still my whole world." That simple yet profound truth kept Sarah standing through her darkest days of despair. As time passed, their house slowly filled with traces of a dream they could not yet reach. In the small bedroom by the porch, an oak cradle Daniel had built in their 3rd year of marriage still stood silent. At first, Sarah dusted it weekly, changed its linens, and tucked inside stuffed bears she bought in haste at the market. But as the years rolled by, dust settled on the cradle, and the bears faded in the sun. Sometimes Daniel would pass by, resting his hand on the wooden rail, his eyes shadowed by a sorrow he couldn't hide. One summer evening, the two sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed red, and the prairie shimmered gold like an ocean of waves. Sarah suddenly asked, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving the city job, choosing this kind of life with me?" Daniel turned surprised, then chuckled. Pulling her close, he pointed toward the horizon where birds were flying in formation. "See that? Everything I need is right here. Work money. It's nice if we have them, but if I don't have you, then I have nothing at all." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes blurred with tears, yet her heart filled with a warmth too deep for words. Though hope was fragile, they never gave up. Each time a new treatment was announced, Sarah and Daniel would research, save money, and set out for one more try. Prescriptions, hormone shots, sleepless nights from pain, all piled up. There were moments when Sarah felt so drained she wanted to stop. But Daniel was always her anchor, always finding a way to kindle a small flame of light in her heart. Once, after yet another failed attempt, Sarah collapsed in the car, clutching her stomach as sobs shook her body. Daniel said nothing. He stepped out quietly and walked into a small bookstore on the corner. When he returned, he placed a leather-bound journal in her hands. "I don't know when you'll become a mother," he said softly, "but from today you can write our journey. One day, whether we have children or not, you'll see that you were never alone." Sarah pressed the journal to her chest, overcome with emotion. That night, she opened to the first page and wrote, "Today ended in failure, but at least we still have each other." The prairie continued its endless cycle of seasons. Winter brought biting cold, snow blanketing the wooden roof, and wind whistling through the cracks. Spring burst forth with purple and yellow wildflowers, bees and butterflies filling the air. Summer scorched the grass gold, sudden rains leaving the earth fragrant. Autumn turned the maples around the porch crimson, their leaves rustling underfoot in the breeze. Within this cycle, Sarah and Daniel lived each day fully, even as their hearts carried a quiet emptiness. One Sunday at the small-town church, Sarah bowed her head low during a sermon on family. The pastor, noticing, stepped down and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Not every mother is chosen by blood," he said quietly. "Some hearts are chosen to become mothers in a different way." His words planted a seed in Sarah's heart, though it would take many more years before that seed began to grow. By the 12th year, time had left its marks on Daniel's and Sarah's faces, but their love remained as steadfast as ever. One calm evening, with the breeze drifting across the porch, Daniel suddenly said, "Maybe we should think about adoption. There are so many children out there who need a home." Sarah sat in silence for a long while, her gaze lingering on the cradle covered in dust in the small room. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from grief this time, but from a fragile glimmer of hope. "Do you think we're ready?" she whispered. Daniel smiled, certainty shining in his eyes. "We've waited long enough. If a miracle won't come the old way, then let's create a new one, for us and for a child out there." In that moment, across the vast prairie, the wind seemed to rise, carrying with it a promise of new beginnings. That autumn, the wind blew stronger than usual. On the Colorado prairie, gusts carried golden leaves into spirals of light beneath the sun. Sarah stood on the porch, holding a cup of hot tea, her heart torn between worry and hope. After months of discussion, she and Daniel had finally decided to officially apply for adoption. The small town buzzed with gossip. Some praised them, saying Sarah and Daniel had finally found their own path to build a family. Others shook their heads, sighing that adoption could never be the same as having one's own blood. But to the couple, the decision was not about replacing what they lacked. It was about filling the emptiness in their hearts with love. On the day they went to the adoption center, Sarah's hands trembled with nerves. Outside the window, the noisy city contrasted sharply with the quiet prairie they knew so well. Daniel placed his calloused hand gently over hers and gave a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry. No matter what happens, we'll find the child meant to be ours." The caseworker led them down a long hallway, past rooms echoing with laughter and tears. Each door held a story: children orphaned by accidents, infants abandoned at birth. Sarah's chest tightened, heavy with both compassion and fear at the responsibility ahead. At the end of the hall, a single image made them stop. A thin boy with messy brown hair sat alone by the window, clutching a worn teddy bear, his eyes lost in the sky. The curtain fluttered in the wind, making his loneliness all the more stark. Sarah felt her heart pulled. She knelt before him, her voice soft. "Hello, sweetheart. What's your name?" The boy looked up, his large dark eyes glimmering in the sunlight. After a moment's hesitation, he whispered, "My name is Michael." Michael was only 6. His file revealed that his mother, born deaf and mute, was raising 4 young children alone in dire poverty. Unable to hold steady work, she had done odd jobs, laundry, gardening, to feed them. When Michael was just a baby, she had brought him to social services, unable to provide for all 4. Daniel fell silent. He pictured a woman voiceless, struggling against the weight of life to raise her children. His throat tightened with pity. Glancing at Sarah, he saw tears welling in her eyes. One small nod was all it took. This was the child they had waited for 12 long years. The first days with Michael were a journey of their own. Shy and withdrawn, He clung to his old teddy bear like a lifeline. That first night, he refused to sleep alone. Sarah sat beside his bed, stroking his hair, whispering stories until he drifted into peaceful slumber. Watching his steady breathing, she realized her heart had never felt so full. Daniel too embraced fatherhood. He took Michael across the prairie, pointing out migrating birds, teaching him how to skip stones across the pond. Michael rarely laughed, but when he did, the world seemed to shine brighter. One summer afternoon, Daniel flew a red kite with Michael. The boys' laughter rang across the open fields, carried by the wind. From the porch, Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, her heart overflowing. The cradle in the spare room still stood, but it was no longer empty. Slowly, Michael grew into his new life. Sarah read him books under the warm glow of the lamp, while Daniel taught him how to build little wooden crafts. Their quiet home now brimmed with childish laughter. Neighbors stopped by, praising Michael for being bright and well-mannered. One evening, as Sarah folded laundry, Michael tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, can I call you Mom?" Sarah froze, then burst into tears, pulling him into her arms with nods of joy. That night, Daniel wept too when Michael first called him Dad. After years of waiting, their dream had come true. Different than they imagined, but just as miraculous. But life loves surprises. Only a few months after Michael came home, Sarah began feeling unwell. At first, she thought it was the fatigue of caring for a child. But one morning, the smell of coffee made her violently nauseous. Alarmed, Daniel rushed her to the hospital. The results left them speechless. Sarah was pregnant. Hand in hand, they sat in the clinic, laughing and crying all at once. 12 years we waited, Daniel whispered, voice trembling. And now the miracle has come. Sarah looked down at her belly, then thought of Michael waiting at home. Tears of joy filled her eyes. She knew then, whether by blood or by heart, every child was a gift from God. The news of Sarah's pregnancy spread through town like wildfire. Neighbors came with freshly baked pies. The pastor embraced Daniel with a prayer of blessing, and children shouted in delight as if the baby were theirs too. But in the little wooden house on the prairie, the greatest joy belonged to Sarah, Daniel, and Michael. Sarah often sat on the porch in the mornings, hands resting on her growing belly, gazing across the endless prairie. The golden sunlight shimmered over swaying grass, as if nature itself were singing to welcome the baby. Michael would sit beside her, pressing his ear to her belly and whispering, "Hi, little one. I'm Michael. Please come soon, I'll protect you." Those moments made Sarah laugh through her tears. Once abandoned himself, Michael now eagerly awaited a sibling to share life with. Daniel became the busiest man in town. By day, he drove trucks, repaired tractors, even worked at the mechanic's shop, anything to save a little more for his growing family. By night, he renovated the small nursery, polishing the oak cradle that had gathered dust for years. On the walls, he hung Sarah's old paintings, once born of sadness, now a gift for new life. One evening, Michael bounded in with a crayon drawing for figures standing in a field, the sun smiling overhead. "Dad, let's hang this here. So when the baby opens their eyes, they'll know we're a family." Daniel hugged his son tightly, unable to speak through the lump in his throat. Pregnancy brought both joy and trials. Some mornings Sarah couldn't rise from bed. Daniel cooked porridge and carried it upstairs. Some nights she lay awake, fearing the miracle was too fragile to last. But whenever she reached for Daniel's hand in the dark, his steady grip soothed her heart. Michael became his mother's little guardian. He scolded her for lifting heavy things, reminded her to drink milk, even folded laundry in her place. Once, Sarah caught him scribbling in a notebook on the porch. Embarrassed, he admitted, "I'm writing letters for the baby. When they grow up, I'll show them, so they'll know I was waiting for them all along." Sarah held him close, her heart bursting with love. As the due date neared, excitement mixed with fear. The night before heading to the hospital, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood on the porch beneath the moon, prairie winds carrying the sweet scent of grass. Memories of 12 years of sorrow, long hospital drives, tearful nights flooded back. Now at last a child was waiting to be born. He knelt and prayed silently. "Keep Sarah safe. Keep the baby strong. I ask for nothing else." The next morning, Sarah went into labor. Daniel drove the old pickup, Michael in the back clutching his teddy bear, whispering prayers. The streets blurred past, every thought in Daniel's heart screaming, "Faster! Faster!" Hours dragged on in the hospital. Daniel sat in the hall, fists clenched white. Every cry from inside the room pierced him. Then a newborn's wail, sharp and strong. A nurse emerged, smiling. "Congratulations! A healthy baby girl." Daniel wept openly. Holding his daughter felt like cradling the world. Sarah, exhausted, smiled through her tears. Michael ran up, eyes shining. "My sister! My baby sister!" They named her Lily, like a flower blooming on the prairie winds. From the day Lily came home, the house glowed brighter. Michael was the proud older brother, guiding her first steps and words. Daniel sang lullabies. Sarah cherished every moment of motherhood she had long dreamed of. 3 years later, another miracle. Sarah was pregnant again. This time they welcomed a second daughter, Rose. Evenings found the 5 of them on the porch. Daniel with Lily on his shoulders, Sarah cradling Rose, Michael racing in the fields. Sunset bathed the prairie in crimson. Laughter carried on the wind. One night at dinner, Michael suddenly said, "I think we're the luckiest family in the world." Sarah and Daniel exchanged tearful smiles. After 12 years of emptiness, they now had 3 irreplaceable treasures. But far away, in a poor home on the edge of town, a door to the past remained ajar. Soon that door would bring them a challenge greater than any they had ever faced. 10 years had passed since Michael first came home. The little wooden house brimmed with joy. 16 now, Michael was tall, kind-eyed, and protective of his sisters Lily and Rose. Sarah and Daniel often sat on the porch at dusk, watching their children play across the prairie, hearts full. Once they thought they'd never have children. Now their lives overflowed with love. Then one winter day, a letter shattered their peace. It came from the town hospital, addressed to Sarah and Daniel. The social worker wrote that Michael's birth mother, the deaf-mute woman, was dying of late-stage cancer. Frail and weak, she could no longer care for herself. Her final wish, to see the son she had given away. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. Daniel sat silently, eyes burning red. Both were gripped by the same fears, sorrow for the suffering woman, and dread of losing the boy they loved as their own. That night, the house was heavy with silence. Daniel sat alone, face gaunt in the lamplight. Quiet tears came as he imagined losing Michael, the son who had worked the fields with him, built fences, flown kites in the wind. The thought shattered him. Sarah came, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I know you're afraid. I am too. But Michael deserves to know where he came from. If I were her, I'd want to see my child one last time." Daniel buried his face in his hands. "I can't lose him, Sarah. I've lost too much already. I can't." She knelt, holding him close. Their tears mingled, heavy but uniting. In that moment, they realized true love sometimes means letting go. The next day, they spoke with Michael. He listened quietly, knuckles white against the table. Then he stood and stepped onto the porch. Outside, winds raged across a gray sky. "I have a mom, a dad, 2 sisters. I don't need anyone else," he said, voice shaking. Daniel approached, placing a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Michael, you'll always be ours. But your birth mother, she doesn't have long. Do you want to see her? Michael was silent for a long time. Finally, he asked softly, eyes brimming, "If it were me, wouldn't you want to see me one last time?" The question cut through Sarah and Daniel like a blade. They knew the answer. The meeting took place at the hospital. The sterile room smelled of antiseptic. On the bed lay a frail woman, hair nearly gone, eyes dull yet burning with desperate hope. Michael's heart pounded as he entered. She opened her arms, lips trembling, sounds broken and unclear. She could not form words, but her eyes spoke everything. Michael knelt at her bedside. When her thin hand touched his face, tears streamed down her cheeks. Daniel turned away, crying silently. Sarah squeezed his hand, both in pain yet strangely at peace. Michael had found a missing piece of his heart. In the months that followed, Michael visited often. He told her stories of life on the prairie, about Sarah and Daniel, about Lily and Rose, about kites soaring in the wind. Her eyes brightened with every word. Miraculously, her health improved. Doctors marveled as the cancer slowed. She sat up, smiled, even walked hand in hand with her son in the hospital garden. Daniel, once fearful, began to see the truth. A mother's love could be medicine. 1 year passed, then 2, then 3. The woman once thought near death lived on, her strength renewed by love. Michael grew with 2 mothers, one who bore him, one who raised him. Sarah felt no jealousy, only relief that her son had another source of comfort. Daniel no longer feared losing Michael, for he knew his son's love was steadfast. One summer evening, as the family sat on the porch, Michael spoke. "Mom, Dad, I think we should bring my siblings here. They deserve a home too." Sarah and Daniel exchanged a long, quiet look. Deep inside, they already knew the answer. 10 years passed since Michael's reunion with his mother. He grew from a boy into a young man, strong and thoughtful, studying at a nearby college but always returning home on weekends. The little white house on the prairie had changed over the years. Daniel had expanded the kitchen, adding wide windows that looked out over fields of wildflowers. Each morning, sunlight spilled across the wooden table, where Sarah often placed a vase of freshly picked blooms. Evenings were spent on the porch. The family gathered as the prairie wind whispered through the grass. Michael loved coming home. No matter how far he went, the house, the fields, and the voices of his family pulled him back like a compass pointing north. But in his heart, he knew there was still an unfinished chapter. His mother's illness had returned, more aggressive than before. The doctors said there was little time left. She grew weaker each day, yet her eyes still carried one last wish, that all 3 of her children might one day live together, safe and loved. Michael visited her often, sitting by her bedside. Her hand, thin and trembling, scribbled words on scraps of paper. "Your brother and sister. They need a home." Those words haunted him. One evening, Michael returned to the family home. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the room with warmth. Lily and Rose were laughing in the kitchen, while Sarah prepared dinner. Daniel sat quietly in his chair, reading the newspaper. Michael stood for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Dad, Mom, I want us to bring my brother and sister here. They need us." The room fell silent. Sarah looked up, her face pale. Daniel lowered the paper, his eyes shadowed with thought. "Michael," he said slowly, "do you understand what you're asking? 2 more children. It's not just food and shelter. It's our whole lives." Michael's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "I know, but I also know what it felt like to be given a second chance. You gave that to me. Now it's my turn to give it to them." Sarah's eyes softened, tears gathering. She reached for Daniel's hand. "We once prayed for a child, and God gave us more than we ever dreamed. Maybe this is part of His plan." Daniel stared into the fire for a long time, then nodded. His voice cracked as he whispered, "All right, let's bring them home." The day they arrived, the house filled with nervous energy. A boy of 10 stood stiffly by the door, wary and silent. His little sister clung to a worn doll, her big eyes wide with fear. Michael knelt down and smiled gently. "I'm your brother. And this is your home now." The boy hesitated, then gave the faintest nod. The girl burst into tears and threw her arms around Michael's neck. Sarah opened her arms to them both, while Daniel laid a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, offering quiet reassurance. Lily and Rose rushed forward, excited to show their new siblings the fields, the swing, the chickens scratching in the yard. The sound of laughter, tentative at first, soon filled the house. Weeks later, their mother passed away, but she died peacefully, knowing her children were safe. At the funeral, Michael stood with his siblings at his side, his heart heavy yet comforted. Daniel placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Son, you turned sorrow into love. We're proud of you." Sarah embraced the children, whispering, "You'll never be alone again. This is your family. Always." Years rolled on, and the little white house became a beacon of joy. Michael grew into a man who carried strength and kindness in equal measure. Lily and Rose blossomed into bright young women. His brother and sister, once timid and uncertain, found laughter and safety under that roof. On warm evenings, the family gathered on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. The fields glowed gold, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and children's voices filled the air. Daniel leaned back in his chair, Sarah's hand in his eyes misty with gratitude. "Do you see love? We dreamed of one child, and now look at us." Sarah smiled, tears shining. "Yes, a family larger than we ever imagined." And as the prairie stretched endlessly before them, the little white house stood firm, a symbol of sacrifice, redemption, and the unshakable power of love.